What was unusual about this novel, ungewöhnlich, was that for 20 years it was only a screenplay. Nur ein Drehbuch, nicht ein Roman. For 20 years. It was a story about two children, age 14 and 13. It took place in 1 year, 1970. And for 7 of the first 20 years, it was a movie set in India. But the director and I couldn't get the film made in India. So we moved the story to Mexico in 1997. It remained a movie. Mexico was a much more fertile place for the story to take place. But the story was essentially unchanged. The boy was always crippled. His sister was one of those characters of mine, the third time now, who believes she can see the future. There was always a Jesuit orphanage involved and a well-intentioned missionary who turns out to be gay and gives up his quest for the priesthood. That was always part of the story. Naturally, we found more Catholic orphanages in Mexico, in a small city of Oaxaca, than we were able to find in huge Mumbai. That was better. There was always a draft dodger, a runaway from the Vietnam War in the story. He became much more believable in Mexico because, of course, like Canada, there were many American draft dodgers in the late years of the war who went both to Canada and to Mexico. Everything worked better in Mexico. The child performers in Mexican circuses also come from very poor circumstances, as they do in India. And the circuses in Mexico, like India, have no safety nets. So these children are at risk, and a story about children at risk, children in danger, that's interested me 10 or 12 times before. But the circumstances of our children in Mexico, these dump workers who are children, even today, not only in 1970, the smoke is less, there are more restrictions regarding what you can burn today, but children are still the ones who do the work. Los pepenadores, the Mexicans call them, niños de la basura, children of the rubbish. And so the atmosphere of the basurero, the dump, became very important to this story. Only in 2008, 2009, between Christmas and New Year's, in Mexico City, did I say to the director, you know, if this were a novel, I would begin it 40 years later, when Juan Diego is finally keeping his promise to the draft dodger and going to the Philippines to pay his respects to the draft dodger's dead father. And as soon as I thought of this idea, I thought, well, only if we see him as an older man can you appreciate the impact what happens to him as a child has had, because he's alive in the past, in the Vergangenheit, more alive as a 14-year-old in his dreams and in his memories than he seems even half conscious as an adult. Of course, the drugs help. The fact that he has a heart condition and I give him beta blockers. This makes that natural tendency to live in the past worse. And by making him a writer, no wife, no girlfriend, no children, I give him the invitation to live almost entirely in his imagination. Also a danger to him in recognizing the real world around him. He's so alert and bright and clear at 14 and so sleepy and tired and apparently much older than he really is as a grown man. I liked the idea of those contrasts. And almost immediately I thought, that's the way to tell the story. Back and forth. Fast, bright, clear, whenever he's a child. Slowly paced, almost in slow motion, like a dream, like a hallucination, when he's traveling with his limp to the Philippines. Last, but just as important, I remembered the scene in the Jesuit temple when Rivera, the dump boss, has run over his foot and carries him to the Virgin Mary, hoping for a miracle cure. The Virgin Mary does nothing. Not then. Later, she will. She'll perform the miracle that allows him to be adopted by two gay men. But not then, not that day. She does nothing. And for just a second, when his pain goes away, he sees these two women, hooded, all in black, mourning somebody. And he imagines, I feel no pain. Maybe I'm dead. Maybe they're mourning me. This is less than a page. It's a very small paragraph. And then as soon as he has this idea, the pain is back. And he thinks, oh, I'm okay. I'm not dying. And when he looks again, those two, they've disappeared. And I thought, if I begin 40 years later, when he's traveling to the Philippines, they come too. They take the trip with him. And he will see them for the last time when the heart attack begins in the Guadalupe church in Manila, when once more their face is hidden, they'll be mourning. I thought, well, movies are good in a small moment of time when not too much time passes. What novels do so much better than movies or plays is the passage of time. Only a novel can make that seem real. And I said to the director, you know, it's taken us 20 years and we still haven't made this movie. We can wait a little longer. I think I have to go to the Philippines and write this novel first. And then we'll make our movie, right? Well, you never know with the movie. You have to write it, in this case, rewrite it again, which I will. You have to find the people. It's a Spanish language film. In some ways, it's easier to make an art film that's in the Spanish language than it is to make a film like this in Hollywood. But in some ways, it narrows the potential audience too. So there's no promise that someone's going to make it. But, you know, I write good screenplays, and the director has won Oscar nomination and has made some good films. And so we have a good chance. And it's a good story. The movie, of course, would not be the novel. The movie would still be only the childhood parts. It begins when Brother Pepe hears about the dump reader and goes to the basurero to see these niños de la basura. It ends with a scene not in the book when Pepe and Rivera and the dog, Diablo, go to the airport to wave goodbye to Juan Diego, leaving with Senor Eduardo and Flor. And that's just right for the film. So I've already written that film many times and rewrote it for this novel as a novel. It's not too hard to rewrite it again. But next year, maybe the year after. Of course I know Garcia Marquez. Magical realism was not his term. But I've been doing that mix of the supernatural or the superstitious for many books now. This is the third character who is clairvoyant. Lily in the Hotel New Hampshire is also suicidal because she sees the future, or thinks she does. Owen Meany sees his own future. The narrator of that novel feels the hand of a ghost on his back in their grandmother's house. This isn't the first time. I think it reminds you of those novels because of the Latin American setting. And of course, Mexico is a good country for a religious miracle because the atmosphere is so religious. It's no secret that faith and spirituality and poverty are allied. There's an alliance there. People from circumstances as poor and deprived as Lupe and Juan Diego are hoping for miracles. They want to believe in miracles. The novel begins with these two children very skeptically, suspiciously virgin shopping. Which one is capable of doing something for them? Lupe says, "So you did something miraculous once. We know, we know. What are you going to do now? Show me something." Well, the Virgin Mary does. She delivers. Without her tears, Juan Diego isn't adopted. Certainly not by two gay men. In no Catholic country. Certainly not in 1970, but not even today. Not unless the Virgin Mary herself cleared her throat and said something or did something. That doesn't happen. It needs a miracle for that to happen. There's always a distinction. There's always a big difference between the institutions of religion, of any religion, not only the Catholic Church. There's a big difference between the man-made rules, policies, politics, doctrines of any religion, and the founding miracle on which all of the world's great religions are based. The Muhammad story is a miracle. The Jesus and Mary story is a miracle. All over the world, if you go to a synagogue, a mosque, a church, they're almost never empty. People are always there on their knees, heads bowed, asking for something. They're not asking the rabbi. They're not asking the mullah. They're not asking the priest. They're going to the source, that miracle that made them believers the first time. I like what Rivera says, the old dump boss whom Lupe makes fun of as a Mary worshiper. But in the end, she comes around, Lupe. In the end, she's converted too. And Rivera, when the Virgin has cried, points to her and says to the two old priests, "I come here for her, not for you." Well, I think he speaks for a lot of people, Rivera. I think people of faith, good Catholics, all around the world, it's not the institution of their church they believe in. In North America, for example, there's no difference between Catholics and non-Catholics in terms of what they think of abortion. A majority of Catholics think abortion is okay. There's no difference between Catholics and non-Catholics concerning what they think about contraception. They think women should have access to it. There's no difference between what Catholics and non-Catholics feel about gay marriage. Majority of people are for it, but their church isn't. That's business as usual. when I was a boy growing up, and the rules of the Catholic Church was you can only eat fish on Friday. The Catholics didn't like to eat fish, my friends, any more than I did, you know, and they'd go out and have a hamburger if their mother and father weren't watching. So nothing's changed.